There is something deeply unsettling about a food that refuses to rot. Leave fruit on the table and it collapses into mold. Leave bread in the open and it hardens, then blooms with fungus. Leave cooked meat out and bacteria take over within hours. But place a jar of raw, pure honey on a shelf, untouched, unsealed, forgotten, and years later, sometimes centuries later, it remains exactly the same. Not spoiled, not dangerous, not decayed. This isn't folklore. Archaeologists have opened sealed tombs in ancient Egypt and found honey still edible. The same substance harvested by humans thousands of years ago can outlive empires, languages, and civilizations. So the real question is not, is honey immortal? The real question is, why doesn't honey obey the rules that govern all other foods? And more importantly, what did humans once understand about food preservation that we have completely forgotten? Because honey's resistance to decay is not magic. It is chemistry, biology, and ancient knowledge working together with terrifying precision. At first glance, honey looks harmless, golden, viscous, sweet. It feels like sugar dissolved in liquid, nothing more. But this assumption is exactly where modern thinking fails. We have been trained to see food as calories, macros, shelf life, and convenience. We look at labels, not at processes. We ask how long something lasts, not why it lasts. Honey forces us to confront a forgotten truth. Some foods are stable not because they are processed, but because they are perfectly balanced by nature. And balance, when achieved at the molecular level, is far more powerful than any preservative humans have ever invented. The first clue lies in something bacteria desperately need to survive: water. Microorganisms thrive in moist environments. Water allows enzymes to function, cells to divide, and metabolic reactions to occur. Remove accessible water, and life grinds to a halt. Honey contains very little free water. Yes, it looks liquid, but nearly all of its moisture is chemically bound to sugars. Scientists describe this as low water activity, not low water content. That distinction is critical. In honey, water exists, but it is not available. To bacteria, this is like being stranded in the middle of the ocean while dying of thirst, surrounded by liquid, yet unable to drink. Most bacteria simply cannot survive in such conditions. Their cells lose water through osmosis, collapse inward, and shut down. No reproduction, no decay, no spoilage. This alone would make honey remarkably stable, but it is only the beginning. The second layer of defense is acidity. Honey is naturally acidic, typically with a pH between 3.2 and 4.5. For comparison, that is similar to vinegar or citrus juice. Most bacteria prefer neutral environments. Acid disrupts their enzymes, damages their cell membranes, and interferes with energy production. In honey, acidity acts like a constant environmental stress. Even if a microorganism somehow survives dehydration, it must still function in an acidic battlefield. Very few can. But nature didn't stop there. The third mechanism is enzymatic warfare. When bees collect nectar, they don't just store it, they transform it. Inside the bee's body, enzymes such as glucose oxidase are added to the nectar. When honey is diluted slightly, say by contact with moisture, this enzyme produces hydrogen peroxide. Yes, the same compound used to disinfect wounds. This means honey has an antimicrobial system that activates when conditions become favorable for microbes. If water enters, honey responds by generating a natural antiseptic. It is not passive preservation. It is adaptive defense. Honey doesn't merely resist spoilage, it actively suppresses it. This layered protection, low water activity, high acidity, enzymatic antimicrobial action, creates an environment so hostile that decay becomes nearly impossible. And here is the critical insight modern culture often misses. Honey was never designed to be eaten by humans. It was designed to be stored indefinitely as food for bees. Bees needed a substance that could survive heat, cold, time, and microbial invasion. Evolution solved that problem perfectly. Humans simply benefited from the solution. This is ancient food design, not industrial engineering. Contrast this with modern preservation methods. Today, we extend shelf life by killing microbes with heat, chemicals, irradiation, or additives. We force stability from the outside. We sterilize, seal, and isolate. Honey does none of this. It is shelf-stable because of its internal structure, not because it has been stripped, treated, or fortified. That distinction matters more than it seems. Because foods preserved through balance tend to support life. Foods preserved through force often resist it. There is a reason raw honey has been used historically not only as food, but as medicine. Ancient cultures applied honey to wounds, burns, and infections, not symbolically but practically. The same antimicrobial properties that prevent spoilage also suppress pathogenic bacteria in living tissue. Modern studies have confirmed this repeatedly. Certain raw honeys can inhibit antibiotic-resistant bacteria. They don't replace antibiotics, but they remind us that antimicrobial strategies existed long before laboratories did. And all of this works without destroying beneficial compounds, because honey is not processed to survive. It survives by design. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. Not all honey shares this immortality. Once honey is heated excessively, filtered aggressively, or diluted with syrups, its defenses collapse. Enzymes are destroyed. Water content increases. Protective acids are weakened. What remains is sweetness without resilience. In other words, industrial honey can spoil because it is no longer truly honey. And this leads us directly to the deeper question we must confront next. If honey can remain stable for thousands of years without processing, why do so many modern foods rot, ferment, or mold within days, despite endless technological intervention? What changed in our relationship with food? And how many other immortal foods did we unknowingly destroy in the name of efficiency? In the next part, we will step back into history, not to romanticize the past, but to understand a pattern humanity keeps repeating, replacing natural stability with artificial control and calling it progress. To understand why honey never spoils, we have to stop thinking like modern consumers and start thinking like ancient observers. For most of human history, food was not something you bought. It was something you understood. People didn't ask how long food could sit on a shelf. They asked a far more important question. What conditions allow life to exist, and what conditions prevent it? Honey was not mysterious to ancient cultures. It was logical. They noticed that insects avoided it. They noticed wounds treated with it healed faster. They noticed it never smelled rotten, never bloated with gas, never turned hostile with time. So instead of forcing honey to behave, they respected what it already was. This is where modern thinking diverged. Ancient civilizations didn't preserve honey. They protected it from interference. No boiling, no dilution, no refining. They understood something subtle. Honey's stability was fragile, not in time, but in tampering. As long as honey remained raw, sealed from moisture, and untouched by excessive heat, it existed in a state of equilibrium. Break that equilibrium, and the illusion of immortality vanished. This is why ancient honey jars were often sealed with wax or resin, stored in dry environments, and handled with ritual-like care. Preservation wasn't achieved by adding something, it was achieved by not ruining what already worked. Contrast this with the modern food system. Today, shelf life is achieved by domination. We heat, pressure, filter, isolate, and chemically stabilize. We remove variability because variability threatens profit. We remove enzymes because enzymes create unpredictability. We remove microorganisms because we no longer trust balance, we trust control. But honey exposes a flaw in that philosophy. Because honey doesn't last despite being alive. It lasts because it is biologically active. Once you heat honey enough to make it uniform and crystal clear, you destroy glucose oxidase. Without it, honey loses its ability to generate hydrogen peroxide. The antimicrobial defense is gone. Once you microfilter honey to make it visually appealing, you remove pollen, propolis, and organic acids, key contributors to its chemical resilience. Once you dilute it with syrups to increase volume, you raise water activity just enough for microbes to wake up. At that point, honey stops being timeless. It becomes just another sweet product pretending to be food. This pattern should feel familiar, because honey is not the exception. It is the warning. Time and again, humans have taken foods that were stable by nature and destabilized them through optimization. We refine grains until they spoil faster. We pasteurize, then re-add preservatives. We sterilize, then compensate with chemicals. And every time, we call it advancement. Honey challenges that narrative because it refuses to cooperate. It proves that longevity does not require complexity. It requires alignment with biological laws. Let's return to the bees for a moment. Bees did not evolve honey randomly. Honey is survival encoded into matter. It is energy storage, antimicrobial defense, and environmental resistance in one substance. The hive depends on honey surviving months of cold, humidity, and microbial exposure. Failure means death. There is no margin for inefficiency. That level of evolutionary pressure produces elegance, not excess. Humans once recognized this elegance. That's why honey appears repeatedly in ancient texts, not as indulgence, but as symbol. Not because it was sweet, but because it endured. Endurance mattered in a world without refrigeration. But modern society no longer values endurance. It values speed. We want food to look identical. We want it cheap. We want it now. And so we accept systems that trade resilience for convenience. Honey, when left alone, exposes how unnecessary much of that trade-off really is. There is another uncomfortable truth honey reveals. Decay is not the enemy. Imbalance is. Food spoils when microorganisms gain an advantage. Honey prevents that advantage not by eradicating life, but by structuring conditions where harmful life cannot dominate. Modern preservation methods often aim to kill everything. In doing so, they create sterile foods that require constant external protection. Honey creates a hostile environment selectively. That distinction is why honey can sit quietly for centuries, while modern foods panic the moment conditions shift. This leads us to a broader realization. The reason honey doesn't spoil is not because it is perfect, but because it is complete. Its sugar profile, acidity, enzymes, and moisture content exist in a precise relationship. Remove one piece, and the system collapses. Modern food processing specializes in removing pieces. We isolate nutrients. We extract components. We simplify. But biological stability does not come from simplification. It comes from integration. Honey is integrated. Modern foods are assembled, and assembled systems fail faster. So when people ask, why doesn't honey go bad? They are asking the wrong question. The better question is, why does modern food go bad so easily, even with all our technology? Why do we need expiration dates measured in days for foods humans once trusted for seasons? Why do we accept that preservation must come from factories when nature solved it long ago? In the final part, we will confront the uncomfortable conclusion this leads to, one that has nothing to do with honey alone and everything to do with how far we've drifted from understanding what real food actually is. By now, the conclusion should feel unavoidable and slightly uncomfortable. Honey does not last forever because it is preserved. It lasts forever because it does not need preservation. And that single fact exposes a deep fracture in how modern humans understand food. We live in an age obsessed with control. We refrigerate, freeze, sterilize, vacuum seal, chemically stabilize, and label everything with dates that quietly train us to distrust our own senses. Food in our world is assumed to be unstable by default. Honey tells a different story. It reminds us that some foods were never meant to be fought against time, only aligned with it. The tragedy is not that honey is immortal. The tragedy is that we now treat immortality as an anomaly instead of a design principle. At some point in history, humans stopped asking why foods lasted and started asking how fast they could be produced. Stability was no longer something to understand, it became something to engineer. And engineering replaced wisdom. When we strip food down to isolated components, pure sugar, refined starch, extracted fat, we destroy the internal checks and balances that once kept those foods stable. Honey works because nothing is isolated. Its sugars compete with microbes for water. Its acids suppress enzymatic chaos. Its enzymes activate only when conditions threaten balance. Every part exists in relationship to the whole. Modern foods rarely do. They are formulas, not ecosystems. And formulas fail the moment conditions change. This is why honey feels almost offensive to modern logic. It doesn't rely on additives. It doesn't require refrigeration. It doesn't beg for intervention. It simply is. And in that simplicity, it reveals a truth most food systems would rather hide. Shelf life is not proof of technological advancement. Sometimes it is proof of biological ignorance. Consider how we explain food spoilage today. We say bacteria are the enemy. We say nature is chaotic. We say decay is inevitable. But honey demonstrates that decay is conditional. Spoilage happens when environments favor opportunistic life. Remove the advantage and decay stops, not through violence, but through balance. This is a radically different worldview. One where food safety is achieved by designing environments, not exterminating life. One where preservation emerges from structure, not force. And this is why honey matters far beyond nutrition. Honey is a reminder that humans once partnered with nature instead of overpowering it. We observed, learned, and replicated patterns that worked. Over time, that partnership was replaced by domination. And domination is fragile. Look at modern supply chains. A slight temperature shift causes spoilage. A delayed shipment causes loss. A power outage threatens entire inventories. These systems are efficient, but brittle. Honey, sitting quietly on a shelf for centuries, is inefficient by modern standards. And yet, it survives everything. That should bother us. Because if one food can do this, others once could too. Fermented foods, dried foods, naturally acidic foods. Foods stabilized by structure, not sterilization. Many of them still exist, but only on the margins, mislabeled as artisanal or traditional, as if resilience were a novelty instead of the norm. Honey exposes how far we've drifted. So when you hold a jar of raw honey, you are not just holding sweetness. You are holding a lesson. A lesson about restraint. A lesson about balance. A lesson about what happens when humans stop interfering with systems that already work. Honey doesn't spoil because it doesn't need improvement. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all is this. The more we try to fix food, the faster it breaks. Honey survived because humans once knew when to step back. The question now is whether we can remember that lesson before everything else we eat becomes dependent on constant control just to exist.